There is a country in the developed world in the year 2026 that does not, by law, have to guarantee its citizens a single day of paid holiday or a single paid day of sick leave or even a single paid day of maternity leave. And that country is the one I'm from, America, the United States of America. On paper, the richest country in the world. It invented the iPhone, the moon landing, and about 11 different types of Mountain Dew. But it is, by all measures, a metric of progress, a marvel, some say. And yet, if you have a baby there, you are expected to be back at your desk within, on average, 2 weeks. If you are sick, you're expected to come on in the office. And if you are allowed to have a full holiday, which is a generous thing that most jobs do not give. At most, on average, you get about 2 weeks. And if you take it, you will be quietly judged by your colleagues. So today I wanted to walk you through the differences of American work culture and British work culture. The contracts, the annual leave, the sick days, the maternity, the healthcare, the whole what do you do apparatus. And I'm going to tell you, but by the end of it, the thing that most Americans under no circumstances want to admit is this, is that a country that is built on freedom has in fact the least free workforce in the developed world. This is the independence myth, I think, the idea of at will employment. Well, let's just begin with that. At will employment. It is the cornerstone of American working life. It's a concept so peculiar in other countries that there's really not a word for it anywhere else. In America, 49 out of the 50 states, you can be fired from your job at any time for any reason or for no reason. You can be fired because your boss just didn't like your shoes. You can be fired because your boss had a bad lunch. You can be fired because, I don't know, Karen at HR said you were just a bit much on Monday's meeting. You can be fired on a Tuesday for things that happen on Wednesday. Make that make sense, right? There's no rules. There's no notice. You can walk in at 9 and by 10 o'clock, you are walking out with a cardboard box full of your personal items, including traditionally your sad office plant. But in Britain, you cannot do this. In Britain, the employee has a contract. The contract has a notice period. The employer must follow the process. And if they fire you for a stupid reason, you can take this to a tribunal. After around 2 years on a job, you cannot be dismissed without a fair reason, even. There's nothing remotely like at will employment. When you tell an American this, they react with horror. They think you have to stay even if your boss doesn't like you. Yes. Even if you're not really good at your job, you still have security. Yeah, there's a lengthy process. You have to document, you have to give warnings, you have to try to improve. And if all of that, the employee still can't be saved, they still have to be given notice within their rights. And that is something completely foreign to Americans. The American response to this is still protecting the company and saying, that sounds kind of expensive. The British response is, yes, we do this because we're not a Victorian workshop anymore. But this means that in America, your boss essentially has all the power, literally all of it. They have already bargained before you have even started your job. You can be a brilliant employee, or you could be there for 17 years. And one morning they call you into the office and they decide that you're just not a cultural fit. Then they put you in the lift with your box. There's no court, there's no tribunal, and generally there is no severance even. Americans have been told repeatedly that this is freedom. It is flexible labor market and everyone is good with it, and that you can leave whenever you want. So that's what makes it fair to you, the employee. But I would gently like to point out to my viewers here that being fired without notice is not freedom. That is not the same kind of freedom you have here at all. Now let's talk about annual leave. So, in Britain, you're legally entitled to 28 days of paid annual leave. That's roughly about, what, 5.6 weeks ish every year by law. In America, you are legally entitled to zero. Zero. I will say that again slowly so the British viewers here can understand that I am not exaggerating this for the sake of comedy. Although it is tragically funny, you get zero. The United States of America is the only developed nation on earth that does not have a federally mandated minimum for holiday. The only one. Well, there is one other country on this zero list, in case you were curious. It's Micronesia, and that's it. That's it. Most American workers, they get about 2 weeks, and many get less, and some get none at all. Many cannot take one of these off because the office needs them. Many do not take them at all because they're afraid someone in the office will judge them for looking lazy for taking a holiday. And there have been surveys after surveys about this. And when Americans take their holiday, their full allowance, if they're given one, they feel quietly judged by all the colleagues. In Britain, you have 28 days. You take them, your boss, in fact, might even badger you to take these days and ask you if you don't take these, you're going to lose them. In America, I worked one I worked once at a company that on the first day my colleague leaned over and said, "We don't really take our vacation here." And it sounded in the tone that she was telling me that someone she knew had died because kind of in a way it had. It was her hope. The British have a phrase that Americans find completely abnormal, and it's, "I'm taking a week off." That's just a complete sentence here. There's no need to defend it. There's no need to tell where you're going. There's no extra. The only equivalent Americans have is what's called paid time off or PTO, which sounds so corporate, it takes out any enjoyment of it. It sounds like it was honestly branded by like an HR third party think tank. I hate it. I hate the word. But in Britain, you just call this a holiday because that is what it is. You, on holiday here, unlike people in the States, you do not check your emails. You do not check your phone. Your colleagues do not bother you and reach out to you because when you're on holiday here, you're on holiday. I remember being in Europe with one of my friends, and while we were there on like the fourth day, she's checking her work emails. Here we are overlooking like a beautiful canal, and I look at her, and she is just on her laptop answering back about quarterly reports, even though she had scheduled this as vacation and was at a very good job. That's the reality. And back to talking about sick days. Sick leave in the States. It's a separate department. In Britain, if you are ill, you simply stay home. You text your manager and say, "I might get in, I don't feel well." And your manager generally replies with, "Get well soon and take all the time you need." That's the entire exchange. Um, you have statutory sick pay here. You sit at home on the couch, you drink your limb sip from a mug, and you get better. In America, if you are ill, you are basically still expected to come to work. I'm being completely serious. So that was great for COVID years, right? There's also no federal requirement in the United States for paid sick leave. So if you don't go into work, you don't get paid. Now, some jobs offer it, many don't. If you happen to work in retail or the restaurant industry, you typically get nothing. So when an American gets sick, they do math first. They calculate the risk of getting fired. They calculate whether the meeting at 3 could still be handled at home from their laptop. They calculate if they lose their job, what happens to their insurance. And then 8 times out of 10, the American still goes into work while they're sick. You can be on the subway in New York City on a February, and you will hear people coughing on their way to work, coming to spread the joy to the whole office, which makes no sense, right? But in Britain, if someone arrives to work with a cough or a cold, their colleagues will likely look at them and probably give a sense of horror and tell them they should probably go home. What are you doing here? You don't sound well. And they'll just go home and rest. But in America, if you show up sick to work, your colleagues typically will say, wow, you really pushed through it. That's really inspiring. I also want to argue the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, this is probably the reason why in every American office there is someone who has continually had a cough for 4 months because they've not actually gone home and rest and got well, or they just pass it around nonstop. But one other thing that women in America really have to deal with is the lack of guaranteed maternity leave. Now, in Britain, there is a statutory maternity leave that is up to 52 weeks, a whole year, and it's paid. What? You can even split this with your partner. And by law, you have to be able to return to your job. In America, there is no federally mandated maternity leave. None. Absolutely none. Your job might offer it, most jobs don't, but it is not mandated. So no one has to give it to you. Women often will give birth and be back at work within 2 weeks, regardless of complications, regardless of how terrible it could have gone. And they'll often just take what is called their PTO days. Sick days, if they get them, are FMLA, is what most jobs will have you take, which is like a medical leave, but it's typically unpaid. If you work for a company, actually, okay, so back to the FMLA. If you work for a company that is only 50 employees or less, they don't even have to offer you this FMLA leave. You you get literally nothing if you don't work for a big corporation, and then big corporations control everything. So you see where like the lack of benefits kind of happen. Now, people in England and Britain, when they go back to work after their maternity leave, they return to colleagues that are excited to see them and see that the office did not burn down while they were gone and that everyone survived in their absence. I'm trying not to make a moral argument here. I'm really not, but I'm just simply observing that one of these countries holds up a flag and says they have freedom, and the other seems to let women recover after childbirth. Those are two very different things. The other thing I've noticed here, which is a big adjustment for me, is that no one opens a conversation with, so what do you do? And by that question, I mean not just what do you do for funsies or anything, but it is the first question before how do you know the host? What are you here to see? What have you been up to lately? It is what do you do? And they're not referring to anything other than what do you do for a job? Because you are a job. Your job is your identity. Your job is your status. Your job, in many cases, is also your healthcare. So when you walk into a room and you walk through first, your job also arrives ahead of you. In Britain, the first question people often ask at a party is, how do you know Sarah, the person throwing the party? If a British person were to ask you what you do, it's often more in regards to something late in the conversation that had context. Maybe even sometimes after several drinks at the pub. But it is not the opening question. Because a British person you can have a 2 hour conversation with about your dogs, your childhood, your opinion on jacket potatoes, and walk away with absolutely no information about what their job is. And this is because I think in Britain, what you do for a living is frankly private and kind of a slightly embarrassing detail, like your salary or your shoe size or the last thing you watched on YouTube. One time, so I was at a pub and talking to a stranger, and he happened to ask what I do actually. And I said, I'm a YouTuber. And he just nodded and said, right. So do you have like a real job? uh, I don't think he was trying to be unkind. I think he was just being very British. But in America, my job would be the topic of conversation for 40 minutes. In Britain, it lasted for about, oh, 4 seconds. And then we went back to talking about the cute dog that he had out on the patio, which honestly I'm far more interested in anyway. But man, okay, yeah, the other thing. I've noticed that there is not a hustle. Not everyone is trying to have multiple hustles going on, which is what you do in America. You do not have just one job. You have your main job, you have your side hustle, and then you have your passion project. You are doing these things even when you're not at work. You are doing these things when you're on holiday. You are thinking about these things even while you're asleep or attempting to sleep. You are the combination of all these things. Your life is the hustle. The passion project, also, you're going to try to turn that into your main job at some point. Like that is how my brain has been programmed. And hopefully you can overlap your passion project into your job, but that is not how it goes for everyone. And not everyone is so lucky. And I feel lucky to have that be the case. But in America, it's not like you opened a craft store and it just happened to go well. And now like the thing you love is your job. It is the goal of every American to have a job, a side hustle, and a passion project, and the hope that the three of these together will somehow pay your bills. I would say here that's considered like slightly mentally unwell. Here, you spend your Sundays not thinking of a side hustle. You spend it going to a pub to have a Sunday roast or sitting on the sofa, catching up on Last Kingdom, which I'm currently watching. The 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 Brits don't seem to feel the need to have a side hustle. A British person does not need a personal brand. In fact, I think most British people do not want one, which I agree. Like, I don't even think Americans truly want one. It's the cultural and societal pressure. Ideally, you should just have a job, you go to work, you finish, you go home, and you're just a person again. But in America, I think people believe that is a suspicious thing to be. There is no such thing as being off in America. You are only exploring opportunities or between projects. And if you can't even fill the space with those, you're thinking about writing a novel. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. There is no just sitting on your sofa on a Sunday afternoon. There's no casually getting Sunday roast with your community. It's a completely different life. In Britain, I think Sunday is considered if you're relaxing on the couch on a Sunday, that's a successful weekend spent relaxing. And I know we've talked about this one a million times, and I know everyone talks about it, but it is still such a shock to my system, and it is the freaking healthcare. The reason you have to be so obsessed with your job in America is because your healthcare is tied to your job. If you lose your job, you lose your insurance. And now that you know that you can be let go for any reason or no reason, your insurance is what is dangled over your head like a carrot. You have to maintain everything. You can't. I've known people who have not left jobs they hated because they could not afford the risk of losing their healthcare coverage. And this is not a concept in Britain. You have the NHS. The NHS does not care if you have a job. The NHS does not care if you have just left your job or if you just started your job and your enrollment period for insurance is only twice a year and that hasn't started, so you can't get your insurance coverage even though you already started at this job. The NHS, in a sense, is a comforting hug from a nice uncle you haven't seen in a while at Christmas. It's still going to make sure you're okay. And hopefully you don't see it that often, but every time you do, it's like, it's comforting. So I'd ask gently to my Americans watching this. One way is you're offered stability and the ability to live your life and have health care and a life outside of your job and safety. On the other side, you're offered questions, uncertainty, and the possibility if you're diabetic, your insulin's going to be 1200 this month because you don't have your job. Which one is truly freedom? Truly. Which one is really independence? Britain has regulations about work, workplace rights, human rights, healthcare rights. Americans are just telling themselves that they're free, they're bold, they're self reliant, they're independent. But the truth is, the average American worker has less power, less protections, less leverage, and less actual day to day freedom than the average British worker. Americans can be fired tomorrow. They can have no guaranteed holiday. They can have no guaranteed sick pay. They can have no guaranteed maternity leave. They cannot afford to lose their job because their job is the hospital. They cannot afford to be ill because being ill is also their salary. They also cannot afford to slow down, relax, get better, because slowing down in the American culture is a kind of moral failure. I try to explain to my British cousins here that the way American culture looks at people who are poor is that it is a moral failure of their own. And that's why we don't have these fail safes for people. We don't have access to healthcare. We don't have guaranteed housing, all these things that you have here because they tell you it's your fault. And we all know that's not how that works. People can be born into poverty and try to pull themselves out. People can have bad luck. In America, you can get hit by a car and be unable to work, and that completely changed the trajectory of your life because of health. But somehow they've convinced everyone around you to look at you and be convinced that it's your moral failure that you ended up in that situation. And that's why you see such grave poverty with no help in America. So I think, honestly, in America, you can be fired at any time for any reason. It's done. In Britain, that's just not as easy. And you get a holiday and you can enjoy your Sunday. And every Sunday, you can sit on the sofa with your friends or your family and not even be thinking about a hustle. There is no hustle. That's what Monday's for. You get 28 days off for holiday. You have statutory sick pay. And this quote always sticks out to me is well, when I asked, how many sick days do you get? And the response was, as many as you need because you're sick. You can't plan how many days you're going to be sick. Yes, this is logical, but this is not what you're allowed to have in America. You're not allowed to have logic. Here, you can just live. There, you have to live to work. It's also something Americans, they really don't want to admit. Is that a country that sells itself on independence and that it is the most wealthy country in the world and it is so free. Most of those people are afraid to take off a Tuesday because they're unwell or to give birth because they won't have time off. I don't think that's freedom. I don't think that's freedom at all. It's just a lie with a flag on it. When I left America a few years ago, well, I guess technically like a year and a half ago, I worked in film, often 60 hours a week. Days on set are very long. There's no insurance unless you get into a union, and unions are very difficult to get in there. It's not like here. Um, and then unions, especially in entertainment, fight you to make sure you have enough hours on the right types of projects to be able to get into them. You don't get sick days. Here, that's just not how it goes. And it's been really interesting to be on sets compared to America and see how, like, there were days, I'm not even joking, there have been days I've been on set where you would be there for 20 hours. It wouldn't be often, but when you have a location and everyone there and the whole crew, sometimes that's just what you have to do. Or sometimes projects will shoot, 12-hour days in like 3 days, just to get it done, you know. And that is not mentally what anyone is doing here on set. Here in the industry, you're allowed to take a holiday. You don't take your laptop. You don't check your email. Nobody's reaching out to you. So I tell my British viewers, my British viewers, take your holiday. Take it in March. Take it in November. Take it when it's raining. Take it whenever you can because you can. And be grateful that you have this that so many other people do not have. Take your holiday and relax because that is what it is for. So, where's the last place you went on holiday? Let me know in the comments below. And if you liked this video, please like, subscribe, do that little hype thing, all that good stuff. And until then, I'll see you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and leave a comment below. And as always, a special thanks to my members. And be sure to check out the Tudor Yank store live now.